Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today we are going to be doing the 2023 Book Awards. I may already have a video up which will be my favourite SFF books of 2023. I decided to limit that list just to SFF because that is predominantly what I read last year. I do typically read across a lot of different genres, but for some reason 2023 was the year of science fiction and fantasy. I don't know why, it just kind of happened like that. So that's why I thought I would create a dedicated list. This awards ceremony is across all genres. I have tried to limit one book per category. Definitely there will be books that could be across multiple categories, but for the sake of brevity and giving you a good sense of everything that I read, I've decided to do one book across each category. There might be some rare instances where I do mention book multiple times across different categories. In 2023, I read about 133 books, which is quite a lot. Doesn't really matter though. I think if you read 4 books, 1 book, 1,000 books, 500 books, good for you. Like, I think reading doesn't need to be a competitive sport. I think we should all try to read as much as we can in the time that we have, in the limited time that we have. So I did read more than I thought I would. I think this year I am going to be reading a lot less just because I have a lot more on my plate this year. And I'm also going to be a lot more intentional about what I read as well. I think over the last few years, because I've been getting back into reading, I've been trying a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but I think I have a pretty good sense now of what I like in my reading. And I'm going to be much more selective, let's say, in what I pick. So without further ado, let's jump into the first category. The first category is the best fantasy of the year, and that has to go to my main man, R. Scott Baker, with The Great Ordeal. This is incredible. It's the 3rd book in the Aspect Emperor Quartet, which is the 6th book overall in the Second Apocalypse world that Baker created. And it's just the trippiest book, one of the trippiest books I've ever read. You know, it's just crazy. There's just so much happening. It's very layered. It's very dark, very oppressive, very atmospheric. I'm just saying words now, but I don't know how else to talk about it apart from just listing how it made me feel. And it just made me feel very confused at times. And I didn't really get to appreciate it until after I'd finished it and really reflected on it. And even after I'd finished the final book and I got to reflect on the entire quartet as a whole. Because it is truly, truly a masterclass in how to write very, very dark fantasy, very character-driven dark fantasy with a lot of layers and philosophy and symbolism baked into it. I was going to make a Baker baked joke, but let's not start 2024 like that. Fantastic, loved it, can't wait to reread it in the future. Second category that we have is best sci-fi, and I actually have 3 books for this, so I cheated massively. But if I had to pick one, like the absolute one book that just, you know, kind of took it for me, it's got to be Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I loved it. Go check out my review if you want to hear more of my thoughts. But it was just the most heartbreaking, but also quite touching book about human intelligence, consciousness, about relationships, about dynamics between people, family, friends, work colleagues. It's just so good. Very closely ties to that, I'd also have to include Sword of the Lictor by Gene Wolfe, which is one of the best books I've ever read. Like, it's just incredible. This is a book for book lovers. You know, I said this before in a previous video or another video that I filmed recently, and you can tell that Wolfe loves reading and writing because the mechanisms that he uses and the way that he tells the story is just exquisite. And I honestly have not read an author quite like him yet. And I'm very, very excited to read some of his other stuff and read his prequel and his short story collections set in the world of the Book of the New Sun. Incredible stuff. Watch this space for my review because I know some of you will ask, but it will be coming soon. And then I have to mention one more. I've just so badly cheated. We have Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert. Absolutely fantastic. You know, completely outshines the first book in my opinion. Just a really great like treatise on like what it means to rule and political systems, social systems. It's just really, really good. Really, really, really good. Next category we have is the best non-sci-fi or fantasy book that I've read. And that has to be, without a doubt, Musashi by Eiji Yoshikawa. This is a Japanese translated book and it's just fantastic. Basically a book on how to live life and how to appreciate life and how to be the best at your craft. And those are all things that I think about on a daily basis. Those are all things that I value in my own life. And it's quite a spiritual experience. And I loved every single second of it. I loved being in these characters' heads. I loved seeing these characters grow from where they are at the start to where they end up at the end. It's just an incredible journey. It's very slow, but it's very intimate. It's very philosophical, has a lot of meaning packed into it. It's one of those books that you kind of have to reread, and I can't wait to do that whenever I eventually get there. Next up, we have the worst book of the year. Oof. I was considering doing a video just dedicated to the worst reads, but I don't want to do that. I was like, I'll just do a category in this. And so there's 3 contenders for this, and I will then tell you which one I end up picking. We have, and this is going to be a no surprise to anybody, Fourth Wing and Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. I'm just going to combine those 2. Shocking. Just shocking. Just absolutely shocking. Just the worst written books. No planning went into those books. It is very clear. The characters do things that don't actually add up to the way the characters are portrayed. The author of the book has a disability, which our main character also has, but then there's this toxic positivity about just pushing through the pain, which I just think is the worst message that you could ever possibly give to somebody who isn't able to function in a way that is normal to most people. It's just toxic. Like those books are toxic and they're really badly written. So that's the first option. The second one is a very beloved fantasy series on BookTube, which actually made me question quite a lot of the booktubers that I watched, and that is Jade City and Jade War by Fondly. Jade City was awful. Jade War I got 20% in and I DNF'd it, which I never DNF books because I'm a completionist. But it was just terrible. Context dumping, info dumping, very weird behaviour from our characters. Like one of our main POVs goes into his girlfriend's bedroom and then like does really weird stuff, like, and like the fact that nobody like talks about that is just really odd to me. The female characters are so bland, and all they're there to exist for the male characters as an instrument for the male characters to use. A lot of people say these books are empowering for women, but they are not. I promise you. They are not. It was just a hot mess. And I just don't think the writing was particularly good. It was very disjointed. The narrative structure just did not work. There's time jumps, which in the second book, which I think is a very hard skill. And I don't think this author has that skill. It's just not good. It's really, really, really not good. And then we have Iron Gold by Pierce Brown, also one of the few books that I DNF'd last year. I don't get the hype for Pierce Brown. I do think now that my opinion of the initial trilogy was massively impacted by hype. Like I think I gave book 1 4 stars, book 2 and 3 5, and then 4.5 stars respectively. And I just don't think that's true anymore. Because at the time that I was reading it, a lot of people were reading it and there was a lot of hype. And sometimes you can't help but have other people's impressions impact your own. And I think that was definitely a case of that, because Iron Gold was just unbearable. I did not like any of the characters. The writing was just not that great. And I was so bored. And yeah, I just hated everyone in the book. And not because they're bad people, I just hated them as characters. So I think in balance, factoring in like expectation, what I should have liked, popularity, hype, I actually probably, it's going to be a surprise, I think there's a joint one for this one for worst book of the year, and that's got to be a toss-up between Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros, which was the second book after Fourth Wing, and I think it's got to be Jade City. Like I can't pick one between them. I think they're both equally bad, but for very different reasons. Like I think Iron Flame is bad just because it's a straight up bad book. Like it's just nothing is redeeming about those books. And I think Jade City is bad because it's part of the reason is that there's so much hype behind that series. And, you know, in theory, it should have been something that I really liked. And I did try to keep my expectations pretty low, but even my very low expectations didn't get met. And I just think that's pretty shocking, to be honest. The fact that a lot of people, I remember when the last book came out 2 years ago, the fact that so many people had to downgrade The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie, because they both came out in the same year, is just, you can't even compare them. It's just crazy to me. Absolutely crazy. Anyway, let's move on from this category. Next up, we have the best classics. So I didn't actually read tons of classics in 2023. I'm going to go back to reading more. I read quite a lot in 2022 and 2021. But for some reason last year I just did not read many at all. But the one that I did love the most of the like 4 or 5 that I read was The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Such a weird book, also very trippy. I did actually film a review of this, but I never ended up putting it up for some reason. But it was just so weird, but very good. And I think it's a very interesting kind of reflection on our main character's mental state and how that overall impacts his journey in that story, like, and his family and his relationship with his family and his relationship with the world. Like, it's just so fascinating. Like I said, it's very odd, but like very meaningful and a great one to read, I would say. Next up, we have the best grimdark book I read, or the darkest book I read. And I've put 2 for this. One, we have The Mermaid's Tear by D.G. Vadron. So good. So well written. One of my favourite books of the year for sure. Very dark though, like to the point where I wouldn't recommend it to most people. We also have Berserk by Kentaro Moira. I'm not going to say it in the Japanese way, but it was really, really good. Like, I finished Berserk in December, I think it was, or it was like the middle of December. I will do a review of it soon, but it was just fantastic. It was... Moira was an absolute class act when it came to storytelling. Like, his storytelling is just incredible. His character development is just incredible. And yeah, I can't wait to talk more about it. But it's very dark though. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. Next up, we have best romance. I didn't read tons of romance last year because I have a lot of issues with the genre in general. But I did read one really good one that I actually gave 5 stars. And that is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. It's just a good time. I think the thing I really loved about that book was the anxiety rep in that book. You know, I've read romance books where like the main character allegedly has anxiety attacks and panic attacks, but it never really feels like they do. And I've mentioned this before, I had a period of time where I was quite sick, and because I was sick and I didn't really know whether I was going to get better, I had a lot of panic attacks as a result of that. Thankfully, all feeling well, much better. I haven't had a panic attack in over a year now, which is amazing. But nobody has ever quite written about what it feels like in that moment when you're having a panic attack, like Abby Jimenez. And I'm very curious as to whether she has suffered them herself or whether she knows someone who has, because it felt very intimate. And that was my favourite thing about the romance book, not even the romance itself, which was also very solid. But it's just really good. And I'm going to read more of Abby Jimenez's romance books because I think she's fantastic. Next up, we have the most beautifully written book, and without a doubt that has to go to The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. It's like a poem. It's lyrical. It's just so layered. It's quite philosophical in a way. It's a space opera and you really feel it, but it doesn't feel intimidating. It's just the most, like, one of the most lusciously written books I've ever read. Incredible. Next up, we have best historical fiction. I didn't read tons of historical fiction, but I think I read like maybe 2 or 3, and without a doubt the best one had to be The African Samurai by Craig Shreve. In this book, we follow a character based on a real person who went by the name Yasuke, who was an African man who was taken as a slave from Mozambique, I think it was, to India. And then from India, he went over to Japan. And he essentially became a part of Oda Nobunaga's court. And Oda Nobunaga, for anybody who doesn't know, is one of the most kind of like respected historical figures in Japanese history, because he was one of the people who contributed to the unification of Japan. Fascinating story, and it was really cool to see this black character end up in Japan, where most of these people have never, probably never seen a black person in their entire life. It's just really well done, and I've heard there's going to be a movie coming out of it, which I cannot wait for. Really, really, really good. Strongly recommend. Then we have new author discovery, and that has to be without a doubt N.C. Scrimgeour, who wrote Sea of Souls, which is a self-published like folklore fantasy book. It's the first book in a trilogy. She's just very talented. Nicola, if you're watching this, you're very talented, and I can't wait to see what you do next. She's also written a sci-fi series, I believe, which I will get around to at some point, probably in the next couple of years, but she's just extremely talented. The writing was beautiful. You know, I would say it's up there as one of the most beautifully written books I've read as well. But for the sake of not duplicating books and authors, best discovery for sure in 2023. So good. Next up, author who continues to be the gift that keeps on giving. Guess. That's got to be KJ Parker, of course. I think he's one of those authors now that, like, I will always read probably 2 or 3 of his books every year now until I run out of books to read. But I read 3 books of his and I just loved every single one of them. Like, he's just one of those authors that I can rely on, that I know is going to give me a good time. I know I'm going to be laughing. I know I'm going to be disgusted. I know I'm going to just enjoy it. And yeah, for sure is the gift that keeps on giving. Then we have Biggest Surprise, and that has got to be An Ember in the Ashes Quartet by Sabaa Tahir. Oh, I really liked it. You know, I don't really read YA anymore just because I don't really like the tropes and the way that YA is written. And, you know, this is one of those rare YA series that I really wanted to read because I've owned it for ages and I've heard really good things about Sabaa Tahir's writing. I did read a sample of the first book a few years back or a few months back and I quite enjoyed it. I needed something to counteract the Book of the New Sun because I was reading the Book of the New Sun. Like, I read 2 Book of the New Sun books and then I read 2 Ember in the Ashes books, then 2 Book of the New Sun, 2 Ember in the Ashes, and it worked really well because it gave me enough time to get really engrossed in both worlds, but then like change pace, because Book of the New Sun is quite slow in places, whereas An Ember in the Ashes is just bang, 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 bang. Like, it's just consistently action-packed. And I really liked it. Like, I'm going to do a review of it soon, but it was just really fantastic. And it was one of the few YA series that I think is actually well written and is actually good. So a very nice surprise for sure. Then we have book or books I've thought most about. So without a doubt, Musashi and Flowers for Algernon have to be up there. But for the sake of, you know, showcasing what else I read, I think Pachinko has to go up here by Min Jin Lee, which is a story about a Korean family living in Japan. And it's about the oppression that they face and it's about their growth as individuals, but also as a collective family. And it's just so good. It's really good. It's really sad though. It's all about the immigrant struggle. I think if you are an immigrant or you come from a family of immigrants, it's going to resonate a lot more with you like it did with me. But, you know, I had definitely some issues with the way that the book was written, but I think it's overall a story that I've thought about quite a lot this year. And it's also a book that I've been recommending a lot to my friends. So yeah, gotta be that. Then we have most disappointing book. So this isn't necessarily it was the worst book in the world, but I maybe had some expectations for it and it just didn't meet those expectations. And that has to be The Green Mile by Stephen King. I didn't know that there wasn't going to be that much horror in it. I thought it was going to be a lot more creepier than it was, and it just wasn't. I also felt like there was some pretty big missed opportunities when it came to the discussion around being a black man in prison. I just think there was multiple opportunities missed to discuss that topic. Not to say that every book has to have a, you know, some meaningful point, but it gets referenced quite a lot in the book, but then King doesn't really do anything with it. So that was a bit disappointing. It was still good. I still gave it like a 3.5, but I expected more and I wanted to give it like a 5 stars, but it is what it is. Then we have creepiest book I read, and that has to be a book by Stephen King, and that's got to be Misery. This book really creeped me out, and that's all thanks to our villain of the book. She is terrifying, and yeah, there were definitely moments in that book where I had to pause because it's very graphic, and you know, it's not even just the physical violences, it's also the psychological aspects, the psychological tools that she uses to completely minimize our main character's feelings. Like, it's really quite horrifying to read. Yeah, really good though. Then we have favorite character I read this year, and there's only one that can be on this, to be honest, and it's a character that isn't even in the series that much, and that's Kelmomus in the second Apocalypse by R. Scott Baker. He comes into it in The Judging Eye, and The Judging Eye is incredible, which I read in 2022, and I just love Kel. I just love his head, you know, not because I think he's a good person, because he's not. He's evil. He's just straight up evil. Like, he's not morally grey. He's just bad. He's just a bad person, well, bad child. It's so satisfying to be in his mind, his twisted little sick mind. I don't know why. I don't know what that says about me, but I was here for it and I wanted more, but we unfortunately didn't get more. So that was a bit disappointing, but I will always remember and appreciate the times that we did get with Cal. Next up, I think we've got about 6 or 7 more. We have best series I completed in 2023. For sure, The Book of the New Sun has to be up there by Gene Wolfe. Also, The Second Apocalypse has to be there. But the one that I've picked has got to be The Stone Dance and the Chameleon by Ricardo Pinto. I started this series in 2022. I finished it, I think, like summer of 2023. And I think it's just a really, really well-written series. It's very dark. It's very unforgiving. Lots of graphic violence, but the character development is incredible. Carnelian, like, such a well-written character. And yeah, it's also very, like, the world building is exquisite in this world. Like, you can see it's very vivid, and like there's a lot of use of color in Pinto's writing in this series, and he just uses color so well to paint like a picture of what the world looks like. It's really quite something. Definitely one that I recommend to a lot of grimdark fantasy fans for sure. The next category is the trippiest book I read, and that has to be The Claw of the Conciliator by Gene Wolfe. That's the second book in Book of the New Sun. The third book, The Sword of the Lictor, I'd also put here, but again, for the sake of not repeating entries, we'll go with The Claw of the Conciliator. I'm not going to go into any specifics, but I remember finishing this book and just sitting on my bed for like 20 minutes, just thinking about what I read. So that should tell you what you need to know. Then we have the best self-published book, and that has got to be A Quiet Vengeance by Tim Hardy. Incredible book, criminally underrated. You have to go read it. Very character driven, great world building, really, really interesting character dynamics. Absolutely fantastic. Really good book. Then we have best non-fiction I read. There's 2 books that I'm going to list here. We have a memoir, and that is The Greatest, My Own Story by Muhammad Ali. So good. So good. I'm going to be doing a video on this soon, so watch this space for that. But it was incredible. It's a story about grit. It's a story about resilience. It's a story about an incredible human being that did incredible things, not just in the world of sport, but in the realm of humanity. It's just incredible, and I recommend everyone to go read it. And then the next one is Tokyo Vice by Jake Adelstein. This is what the series Tokyo Vice is based on, and it's just fantastic. You know, I read it, I think, like on a 4 or 5 hour flight. I was just hooked. It read like the TV show, and it was amazing. Really, really good. All right, we have 2 categories left, and these have got nothing to do with books. The next one is the best TV show I watched, and then the next one after that is the best video game I played. So the best TV show I watched this year has to be The Bear. I watched quite a lot of TV this year. I generally, you know, watch like a TV show, maybe 1 or 2 TV shows a month, and I've watched some really good ones this year. But I have to say, if I had to pick one thing, it has to be The Bear. Season 2 came out, and it was just incredible. It was very emotional, and the writing, the acting, the music, the costuming, everything is perfect in that series, and without a doubt, it's becoming one of my favorite series of all time. Like, it's just so good. Then we have best video game of the year, and if you've been following me on Twitter, you'll probably know what this is, and that is God of War Ragnarok by Santa Monica Studios. Oh my god, this game is incredible. I finished it a few days ago, and oh guys, it was just so good. Now, some of you might be asking, did you prefer it to the first one? I have to say, I did prefer the first one more, just because I think the first one is much more intimate, whereas this second game, you know, it's literally called Ragnarok, right? So it's very much this like war between gods, and it's very large in scale. And I do like that, don't get me wrong, but I really love the father and son relationship between Kratos and Atreus that we get in the first game. We get a lot of that in the second game as well, and we get to see how their relationship develops, which was without a doubt my favourite part of the game. But I wish we just got more of it, because I just love that stuff. Like, I love intimate relationships between family members being displayed in game, on a movie screen, in a book, whatever medium it is, right? I just love those types of stories. But it was just so good, guys. Like, oh, it was amazing. It was really good. Oh, and one of my achievements that I'm going to harp on about now until the end of time is I defeated the final boss in my first go. Pretty chuffed. Pretty chuffed. So there we have it. Those are my 2023 book awards, minus the last 2. Let me know down below what you would put in each category. I will try and list them if I remember to. If not, just let me know down below. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up. And thanks for watching, folks. See you in the next one. Take care and see you soon. Bye.